In the bustling city of Lagos lived a couple named Kunle and Bola. Their love for each other was deep, but their passion for their careers and business was even greater. They had been married for 2 years, but had yet to have children. Despite numerous medical and local tests confirming their fertility, a hidden truth remained undisclosed, only surfacing one Saturday afternoon. That day, Kunle realized he had forgotten an essential document at home. Rushing back, he dropped his car key on the bedroom floor. As he bent down to retrieve it, he inadvertently pushed the key further under the bed. Crawling closer, he discovered not just the key, but also a small box. The box appeared unusual to him, so he retrieved it, assuming it might belong to Bola. But as he stood up, the box slipped from his grasp, and several contraceptive pills scattered across the floor. Kunle stared in disbelief, his anger swelling as he grappled with the betrayal of his wife's secret. His head spinning with rage and confusion, he barely noticed Bola entering the room. She greeted him, but he responded with a cold stare. Her eyes then fell upon the box and its contents. "I am so sorry. Please let me explain," Bola pleaded. But Kunle was already storming out, driving away from the house. Later that evening, he returned home, his emotions a turbulent mix of anger and hurt. When Bola walked in, her eyes red and swollen from tears, Kunle's anger flared anew. How could she have kept such a crucial secret for so long? He demanded answers, seeking to understand why she had chosen to deceive him. Bola's explanation hit Kunle hard. She revealed that she needed 5 years to achieve her goal of becoming a general manager at her workplace, and she feared that pregnancy might hinder her career progress. In her mind, she had justified her actions as being for the future good of their relationship. But for Kunle, this revelation was a harsh blow. All their conversations about starting a family, all their shared prayers for a child, had been undermined by her deliberate actions. Kunle's anger burned fiercely. He struggled to understand why Bola had prioritized her career over their marriage and their shared dreams. He felt deeply betrayed and wounded. He demanded an ultimatum: choose between him and her career. Bola, tearful and desperate, pleaded not to be forced to choose. Yet, Kunle was firm. He could not remain in a marriage built on deceit. Through tears and heartache, Bola ultimately agreed to stop using contraceptives and to try for a baby with Kunle. She was determined to mend their relationship. Seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, Kunle's heart softened. He chose to believe in her love and her willingness to put their marriage first. He forgave her, embracing her in a heartfelt hug as they both cried tears of relief and reconciliation. A few months later, Bola joyfully announced her pregnancy, and Kunle was overwhelmed with happiness. He hugged her tightly, tears of joy streaming down his face. "We are going to be parents. Our family is finally starting," Kunle exclaimed with joy. After 9 months, Bola gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Lodade. As Lodade grew, so did Kunle's and Bola's careers. Bola became the general manager at her job, while Kunle expanded his frozen food business. However, their demanding careers left little time for emotional bonding with Lodade. She often arrived late to school, a reflection of her parents' neglect. When Lodade was 9, her academic performance deteriorated significantly, failing to achieve even a passing grade. Concerned, the school principal invited Bola and Kunle to discuss their daughter's declining performance. "I'm not sure what's happening at home, but it's clearly affecting her. She's consistently late to school, and her grades are suffering. During the last tests, she couldn't even score 20%, the principal reported. "It's our fault that she's been coming to school late, but we had no knowledge it's been affecting her academically," Kunle said. That quantity assured the principal that they would find an arrangement to ensure Lodade gets to school as early as possible. "That would be great, and please, I would advise you to get her a lesson teacher to teach her after school. I believe this would help Lodade catch up fast enough academically." The principal added, taking the principal's advice, Kunle and Bola spoke to Lodade's class teacher Dorothy, and she also affirmed that Lodade had been performing woefully. They asked if she could recommend a good lesson teacher, and she took them to Mr. Coyote. Lodade's parents spoke with him, and they had an agreement for him to give her extra lessons at their home after school. They paid him instantly and gave him the address to their home. If only they knew they just invited the devil into their lives, would pick from school by 4 p.m. and take her home to wait for her lesson teacher all by herself while they went back to their place of work. Mr. Coyote would get to their house by 5 p.m. to teach Lodade and leave by 7 or 8 p.m. with no parents at home. Bola is always the first to get home, mostly by 10 p.m. Dapa would come by midnight. Whenever they arrive, they barely even have time to eat before they rush to bed. Whenever intended to share the interesting things that happened at school, our parents would always shut her up. Please, Lodade, I had a long day. I need to rest. These were her parents' words. One day Lodade's teacher was around for a lesson as usual. But today, something was different. As she sat at the small table in her living room, her textbook spread out in front of her. She noticed that Mr. Coyote's behavior was different. He kept touching her hair, commenting on how soft and beautiful it was. Lodade felt uncomfortable with his actions, but she didn't know how to react. Things took a turn for the worse when Mr. Coyote asked Lodade to sit on his lap and she hesitated. She knew it wasn't right, but she also didn't want to disobey her teacher. However, Mr. Coyote got angry and he slapped her hand for refusing. Lodade couldn't hold back her tears. She felt scared and confused, unsure of what to do next. Knew that she had to tell someone about what happened. So when her parents returned that night, she mustered up the courage to speak up. "Mommy, there is something I want to discuss with you," Lodade cried. However, to her dismay, they were too tired and preoccupied as usual to listen to her. "Lodade, my darling, you can see your mother is very tired." Dako told his daughter. The next morning, Lodade tried again to tell her parents about Mr. Coyote's inappropriate behavior. "Mr. Coyote slapped my hand," because before she could finish this sentence, her mother shut her up, accusing her of being spoiled and seeking attention while her father admonished her for disrespecting her teacher. "He is your teacher. Respect him. You can't be rude to him like you do to us." "Of course, he would correct you," Kunle said to his daughter. Lodade felt frustrated and unheard, wondering if anyone would ever listen to her. As she sat on the breakfast table, pushing her cereal around absently, couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal. The people she trusted and looked up to the most had let her down. She felt lost and alone, struggling to make sense of the situation. The next time Mr. Coyote came, Lodade couldn't look him in the eye. She was scared, and the events of the previous lesson replayed in her head. Today, Mr. Coyote surveyed the compound, making sure that nobody was around. He returned to where Lodade was seated and pounced on her. He warned her not to scream, or else he would hurt her. And right there in her parents' house, Mr. Coyote took advantage of her. Lodade wished the ground could open up and swallow her, but sadly, there was no one to help. Lodade's world shattered. She couldn't believe it was happening, and the fear that gripped her that day never seemed to leave her. Every time he visited, her heart raced in terror. This was a nightmare she couldn't escape. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Coyote's visits became more frequent, and Lodade felt herself sinking deeper and deeper into despair. She tried to push him away, to scream for help, but his threat silenced her every time. She was trapped in her own home, a prisoner to his desires, with no one to turn for help. This continued for months, with Lodade feeling more and more isolated and alone. She couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror, couldn't bear the shame and guilt that consumed her every waking moment. She felt as though she was cursed, doomed to suffer in silence while the man who had taken everything from her continued to visit day after day. Her parents were oblivious to what was happening. too caught up in their own lives to notice the pain and anguish that their daughter was going through. She longed for someone to see her, to reach out a helping hand and rescue her from the nightmare she was living in. But there was no one, just the endless cycle of terror and fear that seemed to have no end in sight. She tried to gather the courage to speak up, to tell someone what was happening to her, but the words caught in her throat every time. The fear of what Mr. Kaode would do if she revealed the truth kept her trapped in her own personal hell, and so determined continued. Each visit more horrifying than the last. Lodad felt her spirits breaking, felt herself slipping further and further away from the person she used to be. One morning, Bola came to wake her daughter to get ready for school, but she was taken aback when she discovered that had wet the bed, as she believed that her daughter had long outgrown this behavior. She scolded her and punished her, thinking that it was just a one-time incident due to playing too much before bed. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of a much bigger issue that would soon come to light. When the principal of Lodade School called Bola and Kunle in for a meeting, they were shocked to learn that their daughter had been repeatedly found with her school uniform soaked with urine. The principal mentioned that Lodade had confided in her, revealing that she couldn't control her urination. This revelation left Bola and Kunle frozen with worry and confusion. They felt at a loss as to what could be causing their daughter's sudden inability to control her bladder. Desperate to find a solution, Bola and Kunle decided to limit Lodade's water intake, thinking that perhaps she was simply drinking too much liquid. While this was going on, Mr. Kaode continued raining terror on Lodade as usual. The urine issue also persisted, which caused Lodade so much embarrassment. At school, her classmates would mock her for wetting herself, causing her to retreat to the bathroom to cry in solitude. It was heartbreaking for Bola and Kunle to witness their daughter's distress and humiliation. Realizing that they needed to seek professional help, Kunle took Lodade to the hospital to see if there was a medical reason behind her sudden problem. After explaining to the doctor, several tests were carried out, and the doctor invited Bola and Kunle to his office. He told them to wait while he called social services, the police, and a therapist. Bola and Kunle were confused as to why the doctor made those calls. They were further alarmed when the doctor started asking them crazy questions, such as if their daughter was staying with them. He also asked about Lodade's daily routine, who she saw and related with. The doctor's tone was serious and stern, causing the couple to exchange worried glances. Bola's heart raced as she wondered what could be wrong with their daughter. "Lodade, what is the problem?" "Doctor, please tell us," Bola asked. As the doctor began to speak, Bola could feel her palms sweating and her breath becoming shallow. The words seemed to echo in her mind as the doctor revealed the shocking news that as a result of the tests carried out on their daughter, several tears were found in Lodade's private parts, which showed she had been abused. Their world shattered in that moment. They felt as though they were falling into a bottomless abyss. Tears ran down Bola's cheeks as she processed the information the doctor had just by word. She felt a surge of nausea and disbelief wash over her. Unable to comprehend how someone could harm her precious daughter in such a despicable way, Kunle reached out to hold her hand, his own face contorted in a mixture of rage and despair. The doctor's words hung in the air like a thick cloud of dread. Bola's head pounded as she asked herself a million questions. What had she missed? How could she not have seen the signs of her daughter's suffering? The room seemed to spin around Bola, and she fainted. When Bola was revived, the social services, therapists, and police had arrived. The police questioned Kunle and the now conscious Bola, trying to get to the bottom of the issue, his eyes boring into them, judging them silently for failing to protect their own child. After the interrogation, Lodade's parents rushed to speak to their daughter, begging and urging her to tell them who did this to her. But Lodade couldn't speak. She busted into tears instead. Her parents joined in the tears. It was a gloomy evening for them. Lodade was too scared to talk, and the therapist offered to speak to her. She asked Lodade's parents to leave the room and urged Lodade to talk to her freely. "He will hurt my parents and I if I talk." Lodade cried, but the therapist assured her that she was safe now and there were measures in place to protect her and her family from any harm. Lodade finally became comfortable with the therapist and opened up, revealing the horrifying truths of what had been happening to her. The therapist listened attentively, her heart breaking with each word that came out of Lodade's mouth. The young girl had been enduring unspeakable things at the hands of Atutu, Mr. Kayode, for far too long. The therapist fought back tears as she listened to the harrowing details of Lodade's story. She asked Lodade why she didn't tell her parents, and Lodade said she tried to tell them at the beginning, but they didn't understand her. And when it was too late, she was scared because Mr. Kayode threatened to harm her. The therapist gave her a big hug and assured her Mr. Kayode wouldn't go unpunished. She went out of the room and spoke to her parents. "When you knew you weren't ready, why did you bring a child to the world?" The therapist lashed at Lodade's parents. "What did she say?" Bola asked in tears. The therapist then narrated everything Lodade told her about how she suffered in the hands of her abuser. Bola and Kunle listened in oral. They couldn't believe it had all been happening right under their nose in their house. They knew they had failed their daughter in the worst possible way, allowing her to suffer in silence while they remained oblivious to her pain. They were bold with anger while Bola wept bitterly. "Oh, my poor baby," cried. "You are a big disgrace to parents, and I promise Lodade will be taken away from you." The therapist shouted before walking away from them. Bola and Kunle ran to talk to their daughter in the hospital room. When they entered the room, they found Lodade coiled up in a ball, tears streaming down her face. Bola rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her daughter and whispering words of love and support. Kunle stood back, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to find Mr. Kayode and make him pay for what he did to his daughter. The therapist gave the full account of what had happened to the social service officer, Bimpi. She listened intently as the therapist finished her account, her expression grave and serious. Bimpi understood the gravity of the situation and the urgency of taking action to ensure Lodade's safety. She assured the therapist that she would do everything in her power to make the animal Mr. Kayode pay for his crimes. The next day, the police went to Lodade's school, and as soon as Mr. Kayode saw them approaching him, he ran out of the classroom he was in and escaped through the back of the school. The police looked everywhere for him to no avail. While the search for Mr. Kayode was going on, the police investigated by speaking to all Mr. Kayode's extra lesson students. And as the investigation progressed, more shocking revelations came to light about Mr. Kayode's behavior. Out of the 13 students under his tutorship, Mr. Kayode had been abusing 11 of them. It was revealed that he had been using his position of authority to manipulate and control the vulnerable students, grooming them for his own twisted desires. The students had been afraid, too afraid to speak out against him. Hearing the consequences of going against their teacher, many of them said Mr. Kayode warned them that no one would believe them if they spoke out against him. All the parents of the other victims were notified. All of them were devastated by the news, some grappling with feelings of guilt and anger over not being able to protect their children from harm, while some blamed the school. They struggled to understand how someone they had entrusted with their children's education could betray that trust in such a vile manner. Some parents threatened to sue the school. "You will pay for this," one angry parent told the school principal. It was a sad day at the school, as the terrible secrets came out in the open. Whispering was the order of the day at every corner in the school, from students to their teachers. In the coming days of the scandal, the school reputation was tarnished, with many parents withdrawing their children from the institution out of fear for their safety. Eventually, the school was closed down for a month to help the police investigate better, While the search for Mr. Coyote, the beasts continued. The police worked tirelessly to track down Mr. Coyote, following up on leads and interviewing witnesses in an effort to bring him to justice. However, he remained elusive, evading capture at every turn. Bola and Kunle were devastated when social services took away their parental rights and ordered them to take mandatory parental classes if they were ever going to get their child back. While all this was going on, poor Lodade went through series of operations to help her heal better. For months, she remained at the hospital. Her parents were only allowed supervised visitation. Throughout this time, Bola and Kunle became shadows of themselves, abandoning their work and business that they loved so much, praying day and night for the full recovery of their only daughter. They blamed themselves and felt guilty for what their daughter had been going through and is still going through. Despite their struggles and emotional turmoil, they remained committed to doing whatever it took to get Lodade back. They attended the parental classes, diligently taking notes and asking questions to ensure that they were absorbing the information and putting it into practice. At the same time, they made sure to visit Lodade as often as they were allowed. Seeing her hooked up to machines and enduring painful procedures was heartbreaking for them. They would hold her hand, sing her favorite songs, read her stories, and hope to be one day able to take her home. A month later, the police set for Mr. Coyote finally yielded good fruits when they got a tip from an anonymous caller who had spotted the beast in another state. The police moved swiftly, and truly, Mr. Coyote was found in a remote village in the said states. He tried to injure a police officer in his bid to escape but was outnumbered and overpowered. Shia was taken to the station and was quickly arraigned before the end of the week. All thanks to the governor of the states who got deeply involved and ensured that justice was not delayed. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial with curious onlookers eager to witness the proceedings firsthand. The judge presided over the case, listening to the arguments presented by both the prosecution and the defense. After long hours of court hours, Coyote was found guilty. And on the final day of the verdict, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Months passed, and Lodade showed signs of improvement. Her surgeries were successful, and she was slowly but surely getting stronger. Bola and Kunle were overjoyed at the progress she was making. During one of their supervised visits, Bola and were approached by the social worker, Bimpi, who had been monitoring their progress in the parental classes. She commended them for the positive changes they had made and informed them that they were on the right track to reunification with Lodade. The news was like a ray of hope in their otherwise dark situation. Bola and Kunle felt a renewed sense of determination and purpose as they continued to work towards bringing their daughter back home. This artist started at therapy sessions right there in the hospital, and her parents were there every step of the way to help IU properly, mentally, and emotionally. Some days were tough on Lodade. She detested the times she had to recount the evil that had befall her, but there was no room for healing. Without facing one's demons and fears, Lodade faced it all. And although there were days she cried, but she was strong enough to pull through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Bola and Kunle received the news that they had been waiting for. They had completed the required parental classes, demonstrated their commitment to being better parents, and provided a stable and loving environment for Lodade to return to. Social services agreed to reunite the family due to the great help of Bimpi, and this made Kunle very happy. The day Lodade was discharged from the hospital was a day of celebration for the family. Bola and Kunle shied her with love and affection, grateful for the chance to make up for the lost time. In the coming years, Kunle and Bola worked hard to pursue their respective careers, but they never placed anything above their child like they did before. They had learned their lesson from the past and vowed to always prioritize their daughter's needs, giving her their undivided attention and listening ears. She was the light of their lives, and they made sure to spend quality time with her every day. They played games together, read books, went for walks, and shared countless laughs. One weekend, Kunle surprised Bola and Lodadi with tickets to a nearby zoo. Lodadi's eyes lit up with excitement as she saw the animals up close for the first time. She ran from exhibit to exhibit, asking endless questions and marveling at the wonders of nature. Her parents watched out with pride, happy to see her so full of joy. As they sat down for lunch, Lodad suddenly became quiet. Bola noticed a pensive look on her face and asked her what was wrong. Lodad hesitated before speaking, but eventually she opened up about feeling anxious about starting school the following week. Kunle and Bolahi exchanged a knowing glance before Kunle took Lodade's hand in ease and reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. They promised to always be there for her, no matter what challenges she faced. Lodade's fears began to fade away. As she listened to her parents' comforting words, she smiled gratefully at them, feeling loved and supported in that moment. Kunle reached across the table to ruffle her hair affectionately, while Bola wiped away a stray of tear from her eye, touched by her daughter's vulnerability. When they arrived home, Bola carried her daughter to her bed and tucked her in. Planting a gentle kiss on her forehead, Kunle stood in the doorway, filled with pride and awe. This was their family, their sanctuary of love. As they settled for the night, Kunle wrapped his arm around Bola, their silent vow to always prioritize their daughter's well-being and never take her for granted. They were committed to creating a nurturing environment where she could thrive, determined to fulfill this promise for the rest of their lives.